Germany's immigration shutdown. What it means for Europe. Germany is raising a new wall. This time, not a physical one, but to put a stop to more than 500 immigrants entering the country daily. The closure of borders is happening in many other European countries such as the Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, Austria, to name a few. There is a real rise of right-wing populism in response to growing concerns about immigration and security. But is the dream of a borderless Europe, where we can travel freely from one nation to another, slowly crumbling? Is this the end of Schengen, the area of free movement in Europe established in 1985? Well, looking at the images of what is happening, an alarm has been raised across the European Union because Germany has resumed deportation flights to Afghanistan. Sweden offers up to $30,000 to immigrants to return home, and some even want to expel certain member states of the European Union with migration regimes considered unacceptable, exactly what Hungary is doing. And all this is happening just as Brussels is working on a reform that could change everything in 2026. The Schengen Agreement contains a hidden clause that allows states to reintroduce border controls in case of a threat to security or public order. If you follow the entire video to the end, you will understand why this stop to immigration could be the biggest mistake countries could make, condemning Europe to deep and prolonged economic stagnation and compromising innovation, technological development, and the financing of pensions and public services. On this point, in America, we must be very careful. As always, there are many issues to know and understand. We will address them all in this video objectively and, as always, with data in hand. What is really happening to the Schengen Treaty? Why does it seem that the principle of free movement no longer works? Free movement has always played a central role in the European project since the Treaty of Rome in 1957. At that time, however, this freedom mainly concerned workers, allowing them to settle and work in any member state. But there was no talk yet of completely eliminating border controls. It was only in 1985, near a small village in Luxembourg called Schengen, that 5 countries of the European Economic Community signed a revolutionary agreement, the gradual abolition of controls at common borders. An ambitious dream made a reality only 10 years later, in 1995. Today, the Schengen area includes almost all the countries of the European Union but also non-member states like Iceland, Norway, Switzerland, and Liechtenstein. Even microstates like Monaco, San Marino, and the Vatican operate as if they were part of it. However, there are still 4 member states that do not participate and have not joined Schengen: Ireland, which has an opt-out, Cyprus, Bulgaria, and Romania, which are obliged to join but are facing enormous frictions and difficulties. And it is precisely here that the first problem arises: the expansion of the Schengen area, or, rather, its lack of adoption. Croatia is the last country to have joined Schengen in 2023, 10 years after entering the European Union. But the situation in Romania and Bulgaria is quite different because both have been members of the European Union since 2007. Although they passed the evaluation process to enter Schengen in 2011, they are still out. The reason is the opposition of a couple of member states like Austria, which strongly opposes Romania's entry. For Bulgaria, the opposition also comes from the Netherlands. They claim that the opposition against these countries is not direct but arises from concerns about corruption and border controls, fearing that their entry could increase irregular migration into the European Union. This stalemate has caused deep frustration, especially in Romania, where there is even talk of taking Austria to court to seek compensation for the decade of waiting. According to the Romanian Prime Minister, the failure to enter Schengen has cost the country up to 2% of its gross domestic product. But expansion is not the only problem we are facing. Yes, because you see, in the Schengen Treaty, there is a somewhat hidden clause. Countries can temporarily reintroduce border controls in case of a serious threat to security or public order. And this is where all the problems begin. What was once a rare exception has now become the norm. Since 2015, 6 European countries have continued to extend what were supposed to be temporary controls, effectively turning them into permanent controls. Austria, Denmark, France, Italy, Norway, Sweden, and recently Germany have all decided to partially close their doors. And how can they do it? Well, there are at least 3 factors to which countries appeal: immigration, crime, and surprisingly, the new program for guest workers from Russia and Belarus. But let's start with immigration. We are not here to say whether immigration is good or bad, it is simply a fact. Many European governments have responded to the increase in migration by re-establishing national borders, and Germany is no exception. In fact, just a few days ago, Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced stricter controls at the borders with Poland, Switzerland, and Austria. This was partially in response to a terrorist attack claimed by ISIS in August. But one cannot ignore, of course, the growing wave of migration skepticism sweeping through Germany. And here the picture becomes more complicated. The electoral pressure is strong. The far-right party, AfD, which stands for Alternative for Germany, has achieved historic success by riding the wave of anti-immigration sentiment. The polls speak clearly. Migration is the primary concern for many voters. And this has pushed the German government to take measures that not only respond to a threat but also appease a restless electorate. The party is gaining support everywhere with zero migration and mass deportation policies. The recent decision by Germany to deport 28 Afghans convicted of crimes has sparked controversy, drawing harsh criticism from human rights organizations. Amnesty International has denounced the move as a violation of international law, arguing that these people could be tortured or even killed once repatriated. But for the German government, public security comes first. With the population demanding stronger action, Germany seems determined not to back down. To understand better, one must have a broader view of the situation in the country. Germany is a country that hosts more than 3.2 million refugees and is under unprecedented pressure. Every day, between 300 and 600 new migrants cross its borders, many of them seeking asylum. The German asylum system is collapsing under the weight of requests, with a backlog of over 500,000 applications still awaiting responses. And while deportations are slow and hindered by legal obstacles, the population is beginning to lose faith in the government. But for many Germans, patience has run out. This anti-immigrant sentiment is not limited to the AfD party. Even the more severe Christian Democrats, the leader of the Christian Democratic Union of Germany, has even suggested that Germany should copy the UK's plan to send migrants to Rwanda. With such political pressure, Scholz's decision at this point is not surprising. And it is not just politics that are at stake. German society itself is in turmoil. With a Muslim population that now represents 6.6% of the total, cultural and religious tensions are growing. While many Muslims in Germany struggle to integrate, facing economic and social obstacles, the country is trying to figure out how to manage a coexistence that becomes more complex every day. But there is an additional problem. These new measures risk triggering a chain reaction. Austria has already declared that it will not accept more migrants rejected at the German border, and the Polish Prime Minister has called the German decision unacceptable. Even the Czech Republic fears a domino effect, warning that if Germany closes its borders, other countries will follow suit, threatening to bring down Schengen like a house of cards. And you see, the second reason for this great crisis for the Schengen area is crime. In recent years, numerous countries have reintroduced controls to combat transnational crime. In Scandinavia, for example, the situation is dire. Swedish criminal groups are using adolescents to commit crimes in Denmark. Norway is also facing similar problems with Swedish gangs operating throughout the country. These episodes are pushing governments to close borders. If this seems like a drastic measure, remember that Denmark has already done it in 2019 after an attack on its tax agency. Finally, there is Hungary, which has added another piece to the puzzle. Recently, it introduced a program that grants 2-year residence permits to Russian and Belarusian workers. This move has alarmed many European countries that fear it could become a Trojan horse for Russian spies. But that's not all. Hungary has also threatened to offer one-way tickets to unwanted migrants to Brussels in an attempt to pressure the European Commission and reduce the sanctions imposed on Budapest for its strict asylum policies. And it is emblematic of the example of Sweden, whose reputation as a perfect welfare model has today become a warning for other countries. 20% of its population is composed of foreign citizens, and the government is grappling with increasing crime, economic threats, and an educational system struggling to keep up. It is incredible to think that this country, which once boasted the lowest crime rates and one of the best education systems, is now known for having the highest gang-related homicide rate in Europe. And what is most striking is the average age of the perpetrators. They are very young adolescents arrested for murders and violent crimes. Entire neighborhoods have become no-go zones, areas where even the police struggle to enter without bulletproof vests and armed escorts. With just over 10 million inhabitants, Sweden is in the midst of a national crisis because it has not adequately integrated a massive wave of immigrants. For many Swedes, the dream of a safe and prosperous Sweden is now a memory. In its place, chaos and uncertainty reign. And it is no coincidence that in the last elections, support for the Swedish Democrats has soared to 20.6%, making them the second largest party in parliament and pushing the government towards restrictive policies such as border controls and the creation of deportation centers. This dramatic change reflects a phenomenon spreading across the continent: the rise of right-wing populism in response to growing concerns about immigration and security. Johan Martinone, a political scientist at the University of Gothenburg, explains that the success of the Swedish Democrats is precisely linked to the high number of asylum seekers and rapid demographic changes with an increase in the foreign-born population. This concern has resonated among Swedish workers who are very worried about the security of their jobs and competition from low-cost labor. The anti-immigration position of the Swedish Democrats, once considered extremist, has now become practically mainstream, influencing the policies of the entire right-wing bloc and contributing to the narrow victory of the governing coalition. The party has not hesitated to use controversial tactics to promote its message. What has Sweden done to solve the problem? It has decided to take a firm and possibly the harshest stance ever. So, the question that many are asking now is, will this hard line save Sweden and other countries? And if it works, could it become a model for the rest of Europe? I will cite some of the most notable actions taken. There are posters in English posted in Stockholm. Flights were distributed on the Greek island of Lesbos to discourage refugees from seeking asylum in Sweden. And obviously, these initiatives have further polarized the immigration debate, forcing other parties to address the issue correctly. But not only that, plans have been announced for the creation of reception centers for asylum seekers, new detention centers, and structures for the return of migrants whose asylum requests have been denied. These centers, which will be introduced starting in 2024, are part of a broader strategy to manage migration more effectively. Asylum seekers will no longer be able to settle where they wish but will be controlled and limited in their movements. These changes have, of course, sparked controversy because while some applaud the government's firmness and toughness, others fear that the new policies undermine the humanitarian values on which Sweden has always been based. One of the most controversial aspects is precisely the establishment of return centers for rejected migrants, with substantial funds allocated to their management. And this is not happening only in Sweden because this is what is happening in the Netherlands, the country where I live now, where the new nationalist government is about to declare an asylum crisis and implement the most radical crackdown on migration policies ever seen. The goal is clear: to drastically reduce the number of asylum seekers arriving each year, which are about 40,000, a number that, according to the government, is putting a severe strain on the country's housing, healthcare, and education systems. The Minister for Migration has formally notified Brussels that the Netherlands desires an exclusion from the European Union's asylum rules so that the Netherlands can adopt the harshest refugee regime ever. Behind the announcement, there is a precise plan divided into 3 phases. First, the government wants to use existing emergency powers to block all new asylum applications and further reduce ongoing requests without having to consult Parliament. Subsequently, it intends to approve a law that allows for the suspension of European migration agreements because many of these decisions are made at the community level. Finally, the Dutch government aims to obtain a total opt-out from the European Union's migration laws and quotas, thus reclaiming full sovereignty over its borders. This plan has, of course, sparked much controversy, especially among legal experts who question its feasibility because the emergency law can only be invoked in extraordinary situations such as a natural disaster or a sudden surge in the number of asylum seekers. But the reality in the Netherlands is different. The problems mainly stem from administrative inefficiencies and a lack of adequate planning by previous governments. And is a crisis declaration really necessary? The situation in the reception centers for asylum seekers is undoubtedly very difficult. In the north of the country, the conditions of a reception center were so precarious that 2 years ago, the Red Cross declared them inhumane. The government argues that the only way to solve the problem is to declare this crisis, reduce the numbers, and make the conditions of the reception centers much more basic and sober, in the hope of discouraging people from arriving in the Netherlands. After all these events, the question arises, could these drastic measures be the beginning of the end for Schengen? The heart of Schengen is precisely free movement, with Germany, the economically most powerful country in the European Union, imposing such broad controls. Well, the domino effect is inevitable. Austria and Poland have not wasted time in criticizing Germany's decision. Warsaw, in particular, is indignant, accusing Berlin of acting unilaterally, violating European laws, and ignoring solidarity among members. The irony is that Austria itself, like other Schengen countries, has long since re-established its border controls, citing threats related to the war in Ukraine and pressures on asylum seekers. And this raises a paradox. In short, Germany is being criticized for doing exactly what other countries have been doing for a long time. Denmark also conducts border controls, justifying its decision with the need to prevent terrorist threats related to the Gaza conflict and the risks of Russian espionage. And if we broaden our view, there is also France, Italy, Norway, and other countries that are following the same path, each with its own reasons, from migration to terrorist activities, passing through international conflicts. Obviously, all this has not gone unnoticed by the European Commission, which so far has always accepted the justifications presented by the various member states for the reintroduction of temporary controls. And it seems that even in the case of Germany, the Commission will not oppose. And so the migration issue becomes the battleground for political control, with consequences that reverberate far beyond German borders. But what does all this mean for Schengen and for the European Union as a whole? Because the Schengen system has already lost billions of euros in recent years precisely due to border controls. The most severe blow could affect precisely the aspects of European economic growth. Here we come to a very important point. The real problem, addressing the situation from the point of view of the economic growth of the entire Europe or of the individual countries. Europe, as we have been saying for a long time in these live streams, has been living in a period of economic stagnation for a very long time. We also discussed it in the last video in which I commented on Draghi's plan to save Europe, which finds itself, as Draghi says, at a crucial and very important crossroads: productivity, economic growth, public finances. These are the 3 major aspects that could be severely compromised by a policy that curbs immigration. Because you see, the demographic decline represents one of the most complex challenges for modern economies, especially in Europe, where fertility rates are constantly below the replacement level. We have an average birth rate in the European Union of 1.46 children per woman. Countries like Malta and France show a notable disparity. This means that over the years, the number of people of working age will decrease while the number of elderly people who leave the labor market and start depending on pensions and consuming less will increase. And therefore, they do not give the economy the opportunity to grow adequately. One of the most immediate consequences of this situation is the lack of labor force. If the active population declines, there are fewer workers available to support the economy both in terms of productivity and contributions to the tax system. This is a very sore point for Italy, where the INPS is practically a Ponzi scheme that only works as long as there is a labor force that pays through taxes the pensions to the pensioners. According to the updated projections of Eurostat, it is expected that the population of the euro area will decrease by 4.5% between 2022 and 2100. We are talking about 16 million fewer people, with a particularly pronounced decline in some countries. Italy is on this list. This becomes particularly critical for the financing of pensions and public services because the contributions from active workers will not be sufficient to support the growing number of pensioners. In practice, there is a risk of reaching a point where there will always be more elderly people to support and always fewer people of working age capable of bearing this burden. Moreover, a smaller number of workers not only reduces tax revenues but also lowers a country's productivity. And speaking of productivity, in Italy, we are really in bad shape. With fewer people employed, companies produce less, and this slows down overall economic growth. Even innovation and technological development can be severely affected because an economy with fewer young people tends to be also less dynamic, less oriented towards change. And in this context, immigration could represent a temporary solution, helping to compensate for the demographic decline. But it cannot solve on its own the structural problems linked to low birth rates. The economic future of many European countries will depend on their ability to address this demographic imbalance. Without decisive intervention, such as incentives to increase birth rates or very targeted and well-managed migration policies, the risk is that the economy of the European Union will see a long-term decline with an ever-increasing fiscal burden on the few remaining workers. Let us know about your practical experience regarding today's topic by writing it in the comments. And do not hesitate to ask questions. We will respond to the best of our ability. Do not forget to share your opinion with us and leave a comment. If you also leave a like, it would be great. Subscribe so you don't miss the next video.